Edinburgh, 1765. The city lay cloaked in thick fog that drifted over the cobblestone streets, curling around the feet of those who dared to walk alone before dawn. Smoke from chimneys mingled with the chill air, creating a scent of soot and damp that lingered in every alley. The gallows towered at the heart of town, its dark silhouette cutting through the gray morning like a shadow of finality. Citizens whispered in hushed tones, some speaking prayers for the condemned, others murmuring curses for the hangman who claimed lives with swift precision. In this city of terror and superstition moved a girl unlike any other. She was the executioner's daughter, a pale figure who observed the world with eyes that missed nothing. She carried a small, weathered book, its leather cover cracked and worn, yet it contained a sacred duty, the collection of final words. Her father swung the axe with practiced certainty, his work feared and revered, but she preserved what even he could not, the last utterances of those who met their deaths on the scaffold. Every condemned soul approached the steps of the gallows, heart pounding, breath ragged, and she watched, silent, poised, her quill ready. As the crowd gasped or whispered, she leaned in, catching every word that trembled on the lips of the dying. Some offered prayers, others confessions, and a few cursed the world that had brought them to this end. She wrote it all, her hand steady though her heart beat with the rhythm of the city's fear. The ink flowed like the blood that would soon spill, capturing the essence of each life before it vanished. Many said she was cursed, destined to walk the line between life and death, haunted by voices only she could hear. Her father warned her to stay away, to ignore the dying, but she would not. Each word was precious, a fragment of truth in a city that thrived on secrecy and death. Nights found her alone in her room, candlelight flickering across the pages as she transcribed the confessions and last breaths of the dead. Some nights she whispered them aloud, soft murmurs that filled the quiet rooms with echoes of lost souls. Her notebook grew thick with the weight of 1,000 voices, each line a testament to the humanity she refused to let slip into silence. Neighbors whispered that the dead followed her home, unseen shadows pressing close, yet she never faltered. The wind howled through Edinburgh's narrow lanes, rattling windows and carrying distant screams from the city's outskirts. But she remained, quill in hand, devoted to recording the final truths of lives abruptly ended. The candle burned steadily into the night, illuminating her pale face, reflecting eyes that had seen too much yet refused to close. The fog outside thickened, pressing against the panes, carrying with it the sense of wood, smoke, and sorrow. She wrote through the long hours, capturing every tremor of voice, every sob, every whispered secret of those whose lives ended at the gallows. Each page was a mirror of fear, regret, and fleeting humanity. Though no portrait ever recorded her features and no city record remembered her deeds, she was there, ever present, a silent witness to every execution. People began to speak of her in hushed tones, calling her the listener, the keeper of final words, the girl who preserved the truth where others only remembered horror. Some claimed her heart beat with those she recorded, that she carried their last breaths with her, and perhaps in some way she did. For her, there was no joy in death, no satisfaction in the clearing of debts or sins. She only sought to preserve what could not be allowed to vanish, the fragile, trembling words that marked the boundary between life and oblivion. When the city slept, she continued her work, eyes scanning, hand moving, quill tracing the delicate line between mortality and memory. She was alone, yet not lonely, for every voice she collected was a companion in the darkness. And though her father brought death to the guilty, she gave the condemned something else, a witness to their end, a record that would survive long after their bodies returned to the earth. Edinburgh's fog seemed to bend around her, a silent acknowledgement of her devotion, the city itself holding its breath as she wrote. And in the quiet hours before dawn, she paused to read aloud one final sentence, letting it float into the cold night air, a voice among voices that would not be forgotten. The day progressed, and Edinburgh's streets filled with merchants, laborers, and those who whispered prayers for the condemned. The sun struggled to pierce the fog, casting pale light over the stone buildings and twisted alleys. Yet she moved among it all like a shadow, unseen yet ever present, the executioner's daughter. Her book, worn and heavy with ink, rested in her hands as she traced the steps of those who would soon meet the gallows. The air was thick with anticipation and fear. Mothers clutched children close. Priests murmured blessings under their breath, and the condemned trembled with each step closer to their fate. She did not flinch, did not speak, did not acknowledge the crowd. She was there only for the final words. When the condemned reached the platform, she leaned in, quill ready, capturing every gasp, every whispered apology, every blasphemous curse, every desperate plea for mercy. It was a sacred act in her eyes, a duty more profound than any ritual of the church or command of the law. Some nights she imagined the words would vanish if not written, like smoke carried away by the wind, leaving the dead unheard, forgotten. And so she wrote relentlessly, hands moving swiftly, ink flowing, recording the fragile boundary between life and death. The city learned to fear her presence, though no one knew why. There was something unnatural in the calm with which she witnessed horror, a devotion to the truth of mortality that unsettled even the hardened hangman. Her father, who swung the axe without hesitation, began to grow uneasy. He watched her from a distance, noting the intensity in her eyes, the way her hand never faltered, the quiet reverence she gave to each last word. "Why do you care for them so?" he asked once, voice rough, coated with soot and blood. She only looked at him, pale and steady, and shook her head. The words were not hers to judge, only to preserve. On long winter nights, after the scaffold was empty and the city quieted, she would sit by candlelight, going over her notebook, reading the lines, committing each confession, curse, and lamentation to memory. She spoke them softly aloud, letting the voices echo in the empty room as though the dead lingered in the shadows, demanding their stories be remembered. Some nights she shivered as though the words carried cold from the grave. Her hands ached, her eyes burned, but she could not stop. Each entry was a testament, a safeguard against oblivion. Even the city seemed to bend to her devotion. Fog lingered heavier near her home. Shadows lengthened as she walked, and those who glimpsed her swore they heard whispers that were not carried by wind alone. People began to say that she could see into the moments when life ended, that she could hear the final heartbeat of a soul and know its secrets. Yet she remained silent, never speaking of her work, never seeking recognition. The priests, the magistrates, even her father, tried to warn her, tried to stop her, but she persisted. Every word she captured, every breath she recorded was proof that life had existed, even if only for a moment before the shadow of death claimed it. And so she continued night after night, execution after execution, until the notebook grew heavy. A weight of humanity she bore alone. It was her mission, her penance, and perhaps her salvation. Through her words, the dead survived, not as ghosts, but as voices, indelible and haunting. Edinburgh remembered the hangings, the deaths, the horror, but through her book it also remembered the whispers, the confessions, the final truths of those who passed. She was invisible yet immortalized through ink. Her legacy was not in fame or fortune, but in the preservation of every last word that would otherwise have been lost to silence, a collection that bore witness to the final moments of countless lives. And though she never revealed herself to the world, she remained a quiet sentinel, guarding the memory of death and the fragile words that marked the boundary between life and nothingness. 1765, Edinburgh. The city was a labyrinth of narrow streets, stone buildings pressed tightly together, and alleys that twisted like the coils of some ancient serpent. Life was harsh and fleeting. Disease, poverty, and crime were constant companions for those who walked its lanes. The air was thick with soot from chimneys, the smell of damp earth, and the faint stench of smoke from distant fires. At the heart of this grim city stood the gallows, a towering wooden scaffold that cast its shadow over the marketplace, a daily reminder of the swift justice meted out by the law. Here the executioner carried out his grim duties with precision, striking down criminals, traitors, and the occasional unfortunate accused of petty theft or blasphemy. Yet beside him, unnoticed by most, moved his daughter. She was a slight figure, pale, her dark hair always hidden beneath a simple hood, carrying a leather-bound book that contained the last words of every condemned soul she witnessed. Her presence was quiet, almost ethereal, yet her eyes absorbed every detail, the trembling hands, the quivering lips, the fear that radiated from every body about to meet death. Citizens whispered about her, saying she was strange, perhaps cursed, perhaps blessed with some unnatural gift. Merchants crossing the market felt her gaze and shivered. Children peeked from behind carts, and even the constables lowered their eyes when she passed. Despite the murmurs, no one dared confront her. Her father, the hangman, was a figure of authority, yet he never commanded her attention. She moved independently, following her own rituals, recording meticulously the final utterances of those who passed under the axe. The condemned sometimes tried to speak to her, sensing a calm in her presence that contrasted with the terror of the scaffold. Some begged for absolution, others for forgiveness, and a few offered curses meant to haunt her forever. She wrote it all, and the city watched silently, fascinated and unsettled by the quiet girl who stood as witness to life's final moments. At home, the book grew thick, pages filled with words of regret, confession, fear, and defiance. She copied them with unwavering devotion, as though preserving the last essence of each soul would give them meaning beyond death. Her father never understood. To him, death was duty. To her, it was history, memory, and something far more profound. A connection to every life extinguished under his hand. Some said she spoke to the dead, reading aloud the lines of her book at night while Edinburgh slept. Candlelight flickering against the walls, shadows stretching long in the cold air. Others claimed that the dead whispered back, haunting her dreams, shaping her destiny, and binding her to the task she could never abandon. Her footsteps became known to those who lived near the scaffold. A light, hurried movement among the fog, a fleeting shadow collecting the last words of the doomed. No matter the season, snow or rain, she was present. Summer heat could not make her falter. Winter frost could not deter her ink-stained fingers. Her devotion transformed the execution site from a place of fear to a repository of human truth, a place where the living observed death while she preserved its memory. Friends she had none, lovers she never sought. She existed solely for the task, each line written a testament, each word a link between life and oblivion. Edinburgh itself seemed to bend around her presence, fog thickening as if to hide her, streets whispering of the quiet witness who recorded every final breath. Even those who disdained her father's profession began to see her as something different, something sacred or profane depending on belief. She was a scholar of mortality, a historian of the condemned, an invisible chronicler in a city defined by its shadows. Though no portrait would show her face and no name would echo through history, her work was immortal, carried in ink and memory, capturing the last truth of every soul who faced the executioner's blade, preserving voices that might otherwise vanish into the unforgiving silence of death. The executioner's daughter moved through Edinburgh with a quiet purpose that drew attention without intent. She walked the narrow streets, past the stone houses with their darkened windows, listening to the distant clang of the bell that marked another life to be ended. The marketplace buzzed with merchants calling prices, children laughing in the alleys and mothers clutching infants, yet she seemed untouched by the normal rhythm of the city. Her leather-bound book rested in her hands, heavy with the words of those who had already met death, each page a repository of human sorrow, fear, and confession. It was said that her eyes could pierce through the bravest of men, seeing the truth behind their facades and capturing it in her writing. The condemned, as they approached the scaffold, felt a strange calm in her presence. Some whispered their secrets to her, believing that she would carry them beyond the world of the living, recording truths that would otherwise die with them. Her father, the hangman, never interfered, though he often glanced at her from the shadowed steps of the gallows. He understood death, its weight and its inevitability, but he could not comprehend why his daughter would dedicate herself to the words of the dying. Nights found her alone, quill in hand, as candlelight flickered across the pages of her ever-growing book. She read aloud the confessions, curses, and apologies of the dead, letting their voices fill the silent room. Sometimes she paused, trembling as though the ink and words themselves carried the chill of the grave. Yet she persisted. Her devotion became ritualistic. No weather could deter her. No city decree could dissuade her. The fog rolled thicker around her presence, as if the city itself sought to cloak her in shadows. Recognizing the solemn duty she performed, neighbors whispered stories of voices lingering long after the executions ended, following her into her home, whispering secrets that only she could hear. She never complained, never sought comfort, only continued her work, line by line, word by word, preserving the humanity in death. Even as Edinburgh grew colder, darker, and more superstitious, her path remained unchanged. Some believed she was blessed by spirits, others said cursed, but all agreed that she alone bore witness to the city's final words. Her notebook became a legend among those who dared to speak of her in hushed tones. Pages stained with rain, ink, and tears told the stories of criminals, thieves, murderers, and innocents alike, each confession meticulously recorded, preserved for eternity. In those pages, the city found a hidden history, voices of the voiceless, a record of humanity amidst brutality. She understood that death was impartial, yet words were a bridge between life and oblivion. While her father delivered the final blow, she offered something else, a remembrance, a silent acknowledgement, and a witness to the truth each soul carried within. Candlelight illuminated her face during long winter nights, reflecting her pale features and determined expression. She remained focused, writing tirelessly, unbothered by exhaustion or grief. The fog outside pressed against the windows, carrying the scent of soot and fear, but she ignored it, dedicated entirely to the task. Each written word reinforced the fragile thread between life and memory, a connection she alone maintained. Edinburgh's citizens came to respect, fear, and revere her in secret, knowing that she preserved the final voices of those who passed, and that her book held stories that no one else would ever hear. She was invisible in the city's daily life, yet immortal through her work, a silent chronicler, guarding the last truths of humanity against the oblivion of time. Her devotion ensured that every voice, every confession, every whisper of regret or defiance would remain, etched permanently in her leather-bound tome, an eternal witness to the lives extinguished by the axe and the shadows of the gallows. Rumors spread quickly through the winding streets of Edinburgh, whispers of strange happenings that defied explanation, carrying dread with every retelling. Merchants spoke in hushed tones of figures seen near the gallows before dawn, moving like shadows, silent and purposeful. Children claimed they heard voices that were not carried by wind, voices repeating secrets too heavy for living ears. The executioner's daughter became the center of these stories, a figure who inspired awe, fear, and fascination simultaneously. Citizens wondered how she could endure the constant exposure to death, how her hands remained steady as she captured every final word, and how her presence seemed to stir something unseen within the fog. Some said she could hear confessions that had been forgotten by time, that she knew the secrets of the condemned before they even reached the scaffold. As the days grew colder, the fog thicker, the city itself seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. Traders locked doors earlier, and mothers ushered children inside sooner, sensing the strange energy that lingered whenever she passed. Her book grew heavier, not just with ink and paper, but with the weight of countless voices, each one a testimony to lives abruptly ended, fears exposed, regrets confessed, and curses spoken. Rumors claimed that the spirits of those whose words she recorded lingered around her, invisible yet ever present, guiding her hand, whispering their stories, demanding that the world remember. The hangman himself, her father, noticed changes in the behavior of the condemned. Some stopped struggling at the platform, whispering to her as they ascended the steps, their voices carrying a trust reserved for someone they barely knew. He wondered at her calm, her unwavering attention, her dedication to an invisible duty that no one else could comprehend. The city's authorities began to take notice, worried about the strange fascination with her work. Magistrates debated whether her influence over the condemned was unnatural, whether her presence affected the behavior of those about to die. Priests whispered in private, suggesting that she was touched by spirits, chosen to witness what mortals could not endure. Even the street urchins, those who dared to steal from merchants and beg for bread, spoke of her in awe, noting how she never flinched, never faltered, never allowed fear to show. She collected words like a scholar, cataloging confessions, curses, last prayers, and apologies, her hand moving quickly, ink flowing like lifeblood onto each page. Winter nights were the harshest. The cold seeped through stone walls, chilling fingers and bones, yet she persisted. Candlelight flickered, casting long shadows across her room, and the city itself seemed to bend slightly to her purpose. Fog pressing closer, darkness lingering longer. It was said that those she recorded whispered to her at night, their voices echoing softly, sometimes warning, sometimes pleading, sometimes demanding acknowledgement. She never stopped, never complained, and never looked away. Each page of her book became a sacred repository, a silent testament to the lives extinguished by the axe, a bridge between the living and the dead. As whispers spread, more condemned sought her out, begging to share their secrets before the end, knowing that in her presence, their last words would not vanish into oblivion. Some nights she walked the streets after the executions, notebook in hand, chasing echoes that no one else could hear. The fog wrapped around her, concealing her from the world, carrying the weight of history, fear, and memory along with her. The city became alive with stories of her devotion, of the voices she preserved, and of the strange calm she exuded in the presence of death. She became more than a witness. She became a guardian of truths that no one else dared acknowledge, a quiet sentinel ensuring that the final words of the dead were never forgotten, etched permanently into the pages of her ever-growing book. The city's whispers grew louder, carrying stories of her devotion and strange presence near the scaffold. Citizens began to take note, some fearful, others curious, of the girl who watched the condemned with unwavering attention. Merchants closed their shops earlier, fearful of shadows that seemed to move independently. Children clung to their mothers, and the priests whispered among themselves about unnatural powers. She moved like a ghost, unnoticed by most, yet leaving a mark on all who saw her. Each time the bell tolled, signaling the next execution, she positioned herself near the platform, quill in hand, notebook open, ready to capture every trembling word. Rumors claimed that the condemned felt calmer in her presence, speaking their final truths not to the priest, not to the hangman, but to her. Some believed she had the gift to soothe souls, to hear confessions that had been silenced by fear or guilt. Her father watched silently, noting how some criminals whispered directly to her, their hands shaking, their eyes wide, yet finding solace in her attention. Even the city magistrates began to worry, fearing that her presence altered the demeanor of those about to die, and that her influence might carry beyond mere observation. Candlelight flickered through her room at night, shadows stretching across the walls as she transcribed each confession, curse, plea, or apology. The voices seemed to linger after the executions, echoing in her mind, guiding her hand, reminding her that the words must be preserved. She remained steadfast, never looking away, never allowing fatigue to interfere, even as the fog pressed heavily against the city, and winter's chill bit at her fingers. Her book grew thicker with every passing day, pages swelling with the weight of human truth, capturing both the horror and the humanity of those who faced death. Neighbors whispered that they heard soft murmurs, as though the spirits of the executed followed her home, their words intertwining with her own. She did not fear them. She welcomed them, letting their voices guide her pen, ensuring that the final moments of each life were recorded with precision and care. Some nights she walked the streets alone, notebook in hand, seeking echoes that had been lost in the crowd, preserving truths that might otherwise vanish. The city's fog seemed to bend around her, shadows lingering longer where she passed, as if Edinburgh itself acknowledged her sacred duty. The hangman, her father, began to treat her with a wary respect, recognizing that her work, though strange, held value beyond his understanding. He saw the effect she had on those about to die, how their words changed in her presence, softened, unburdened, carrying an honesty that he had never witnessed before. Her neighbors came to speak of her in hushed tones, sharing stories of the girl who preserved final confessions, whose notebook contained truths no one else dared record. Children told tales of her walking silently among the fog, her quill moving as though possessed, capturing the whispers of the dead. The priests and magistrates debated whether she was touched by spirits, whether she had been chosen to witness and record what mortals could not endure, but no one could stop her. She remained unwavering, dedicating herself to the task, understanding that the last words of the condemned were the only bridge between life and oblivion. Each line she wrote became a memorial, a testimony, a permanent echo of the voices that would otherwise vanish. Edinburgh held its breath whenever she appeared, acknowledging her presence silently, knowing that she alone preserved the final truths of countless souls, immortalizing them in her ever-growing leather-bound book, ensuring that life, even in its end, was not forgotten. The day of the execution arrived with a heavy sky, gray clouds pressing low over Edinburgh, the fog thicker than usual, curling through the streets like a living thing. The marketplace, normally crowded with merchants and townsfolk, was quieter, whispers moving faster than feet, rumors of a condemned man who had committed an atrocity so horrific that even hardened citizens trembled at the thought. She positioned herself near the scaffold, notebook in hand, quill poised as the hangman adjusted his hood and prepared the axe. The condemned appeared, hands bound, eyes wide, mouth opening in a silent scream that the wind seemed to swallow before it could reach the crowd. She watched every detail, noting the tremor in the hands, the pallor of the skin, the way fear twisted the muscles in the neck. The crowd leaned forward, collective breath held, some shielding children from the sight, others staring with morbid fascination. She wrote tirelessly, capturing each word as it escaped in ragged gasps, prayers, curses, confessions, pleas, and apologies. Every syllable weighed heavily on her ink-stained fingers, yet she did not falter. The condemned began to speak, voice quivering but audible, recounting deeds long buried in guilt and secrecy. He confessed acts so brutal, so horrifying, that even the hangman paused momentarily, axe in hand, feeling a shiver of unease crawl along his spine. She wrote each sentence, trembling slightly, knowing these words would survive long after bodies decayed, long after the scaffold was dismantled, long after the city had forgotten the day entirely. The crowd was silent, sensing the gravity of the moment, though none knew that she was recording every final utterance, preserving the humanity and horror in one continuous thread. As the condemned drew closer to the trapdoor, his voice faltered, eyes darting to her, a fleeting recognition of someone who could understand without judgment. He whispered his last confessions, secrets that had consumed him, truths he had feared even his own conscience could not bear, and she caught each one, pen moving swiftly, pages filling with the weight of mortality. The hangman's axe lifted, shadow stretching across the platform, and she remained still, quill poised until the very instant the trapdoor swung. A hush fell over the crowd, a moment of suspended time where all that existed was the condemned, the executioner, and her witness. She did not blink, did not falter, and in that instant the final word was captured, etched permanently into the leather-bound tome. The condemned's body swung briefly before stillness, and she wrote the final syllables as the echoes of life faded into silence. The crowd gasped, some looked away, and others whispered prayers, but she remained calm, continuing her work, tracing the final words with reverence and precision. Each breath, each gasp, each confession that slipped past trembling lips was preserved. She felt the weight of countless souls in her hands, their stories pressing against her consciousness. Yet she endured, knowing that memory and record were the only forms of immortality for those who had been extinguished. The fog seemed to bend closer, shadows lengthening, wrapping the scaffold, the girl, the hangman, and the condemned in a suffocating embrace. Her notebook grew heavier, a burden of human truth that could not be shared, only borne in silence. The condemned's final scream had been muted by the wind, but on her pages it remained, permanent and unyielding. Witnessing such horror did not break her. It honed her devotion, sharpening her understanding of mortality, the fragility of life, and the imperative of remembrance. Each stroke of her quill was a lifeline, preserving what the world might otherwise erase, capturing the humanity that persisted even in the shadow of brutal death. The crowd began to disperse, but she remained, finishing the transcription of every word, every sigh, every whispered plea for mercy, ensuring that no final expression would vanish into the fog, lost and forgotten, that the condemned had spoken and would forever remain immortal in ink. The axe fell with a metallic thud, echoing across the marketplace, a sound that carried both finality and terror. The condemned lay still, lifeless, yet her quill continued to move, tracing every final whisper, every shiver, every unspoken regret that lingered in the air. The crowd murmured uneasily, some turning away, unable to witness the last traces of life slipping from the body before them. But she remained unwavering, a silent guardian of truth, recording each fragment of mortality with precision. The condemned's last words were now etched permanently into her notebook, preserved for eternity, a testament to lives extinguished and truths unspoken. She felt the weight of countless souls pressing upon her, the accumulated sorrow, fear, and guilt of a city's condemned carried within her hands. Yet she did not falter. The responsibility was sacred, a duty she accepted willingly. The hangman, her father, watched silently, his heart heavy with the knowledge that while he delivered death, she delivered remembrance. He could never comprehend the depth of her devotion, the way she preserved what others deemed insignificant. The tremor of a hand, the fleeting glance, the whispered confession. As the body was removed from the scaffold, the crowd dispersed, leaving behind whispers and echoes that seemed to linger longer than usual, as though the city itself had been touched by her silent presence. She remained for hours, reviewing the page, ensuring that every word, every syllable, every nuance had been captured accurately, leaving nothing to chance, nothing to fade into obscurity. Even as dusk fell and the fog thickened, she continued her work, quill moving tirelessly, the candle casting long shadows across the walls, illuminating her pale, determined face. The weight of mortality pressed upon her, yet she embraced it, knowing that the preservation of these final words was a task no one else could bear. Nights like these were not uncommon, but each execution carried a new gravity, a fresh wave of human emotion that demanded careful observation and meticulous recording. The condemned's relatives whispered in the distance, unaware that she had preserved not just their loved one's death, but the essence of who they had been in their final moments. She was alone with the echoes, yet never lonely. The voices of the departed filled the room, guiding her hand, inspiring reverence and deepening her understanding of life, death, and memory. Sometimes she imagined that the spirits lingered, hovering just beyond the flickering candlelight, offering silent thanks for their stories to be remembered. Her father approached once, hesitant, and observed her steady quill, her unwavering focus, and the reverence with which she handled the ink-stained pages. He spoke not a word, realizing that she had found a purpose far beyond the physical act of death he delivered. The city outside settled into uneasy quiet, fog pressing against the stone walls, yet she remained, a solitary witness to what had transpired. Each word she had captured was a bridge between life and oblivion, ensuring that no truth, no confession, no plea, no curse would vanish into silence. Her notebook, thick and heavy, held more than ink. It held the last vestiges of humanity, a sacred record of those who had passed through the shadow of the gallows. As the night deepened, she read aloud, softly, the words she had just recorded, letting them resonate in the silent room, a memorial to the lives extinguished, a testimony to the fragile beauty and terror of mortality. The executioner's daughter understood that while the city would forget, while history might overlook these voices, her work preserved them against time and oblivion, granting a form of immortality to those who had perished under the axe. And so she continued, unwavering, devoted, ensuring that each final word would live on, a permanent echo of the last breaths, the whispered regrets, the confessions, and the curses that defined human mortality, a silent guardian chronicling the city's most haunting truths in her ever-growing sacred tome. The city slowly returned to its grim rhythm after the execution, though the air remained thick with unease. Streets were quieter, merchants wary of lingering shadows, and the fog clung stubbornly to the alleys. The hangman's daughter remained near the scaffold for hours, notebook in hand, ensuring that every utterance had been faithfully recorded, each fragment of final words preserved. The crowd had dispersed, leaving behind whispers and uneasy glances, yet she stayed, silent and unwavering, a solitary witness to the aftermath of death. Her father approached at dusk, weary from his labor, and observed her meticulous care, noting how she treated each word as sacred, each confession a lifeline beyond the reach of time. Some citizens spoke in hushed tones of her devotion, claiming that she seemed untouched by grief, yet more deeply connected to the souls that had passed than anyone alive. The city itself seemed to recognize her presence. Fog lingered longer. Shadows stretched across walls as if to honor her duty, and even the condemned who had survived previous days spoke in whispers of the girl who preserved final truths. Nights were particularly intense. Alone in her room, candlelight flickering across ink-stained pages, she revisited every confession, curse, plea, and lamentation recorded that day. Sometimes she read them aloud, letting the voices resonate in the silence, a chorus of memory that filled the cold air, as if the spirits themselves were guiding her hand. The weight of so many lives pressed upon her shoulders, yet she bore it with steady determination, understanding that remembrance was a responsibility heavier than death itself. Families of the executed sometimes came to speak with her father, unaware that she had documented more than the act of execution itself, their grief, their anger, their confusion, all captured, all preserved within the pages of her growing tome. Each line she recorded became a bridge between the departed and the living, a testament to lives cut short and truths too potent to vanish. Neighbors whispered rumors of her strange dedication, some claiming that the dead had begun to haunt her footsteps, following her into the streets, seeking recognition for their final words. She accepted these tales silently, never refuting or confirming, only continuing her work with precision, devotion, and reverence. The hangman, once a solitary executor of punishment, began to recognize that his daughter's labor was unparalleled, that her commitment to preserving human voices extended beyond mere fascination, that she had transformed death into a repository of memory, history, and humanity. On nights when the city slept under a thick blanket of fog and distant bells echoed through narrow streets, she read aloud each word, allowing it to float into the darkness, giving permanence to confessions, curses, regrets, and last prayers. The city's history was darker than most could bear, yet she bore witness without complaint, accepting the burden of memory, understanding that life's final moments deserved recognition beyond the immediate horror of their end. Every page added to her book strengthened the invisible chain connecting the past and present, living and dead, ensuring that no final expression would be lost to time, that the voices of the condemned would echo eternally. Merchants, mothers, priests, and children alike began to speak of her with reverence, acknowledging her unseen influence, and even the magistrates considered her work extraordinary, though unsettling. They feared the unnatural calm she inspired in those facing death, yet they could not deny that the preservation of final words offered a unique record of human truth and emotion. Nights grew longer, winters harsher, but she persisted, quill moving tirelessly across each page, the candlelight flickering shadows across walls lined with ink and memory. Each entry served as a memorial, a testament to lives extinguished under the blade, a record of humanity caught between existence and oblivion. And in the silent hours after the crowd had gone, after the scaffold was empty, she remained, guarding the voices of the dead, giving permanence to confessions, curses, pleas, and regrets, and ensuring that the city's darkest truths would not vanish into the fog or be swallowed by time. Her work, unrecognized and unpraised, carried the weight of countless souls immortalized in ink, a quiet monument to mortality and memory that none could ignore if they truly understood the depth of her dedication. Days turned into nights, and Edinburgh continued its uneasy rhythm, but the presence of the executioner's daughter lingered like a shadow over the city. Stories of her dedication spread quietly, whispered among citizens who claimed she preserved the final words of the dead, voices that would otherwise vanish into silence. Merchants spoke of seeing her near the scaffold before dawn, notebook in hand, quill poised, capturing each tremor, each sigh, each whispered confession of those about to meet the axe. Children who dared peek from alleys spoke of a pale figure who moved silently, observing with unwavering focus, listening to secrets that no living person could bear to hear. Even the hangman, her father, recognized that her work was extraordinary. While he delivered death swiftly and without hesitation, she delivered something far more lasting, the preservation of humanity in its final fragile form. Candlelight illuminated her small room at night, revealing pages thick with ink, each word a testament to life ended, confessions spoken, curses muttered, and prayers whispered. The fog pressed against the windows, heavy and cold, yet she persisted, tracing each word carefully, letting nothing be lost to time or forgetfulness. Families of the condemned occasionally visited her father, speaking grief-laden words that she recorded silently, knowing that every expression, even of those who mourned, was part of the story of life and death. Neighbors whispered that her room was haunted by voices, the spirits of the executed lingering long after the scaffold had been cleared. She welcomed them in silence, letting the echoes guide her quill, preserving truths that could not be allowed to fade. Nights became long rituals. She read aloud the words she had collected, letting them resonate through the empty house, her own voice mingling with the whispers of the dead, creating a chorus of memory that refused to die. Each confession, curse, plea, or lamentation became permanent in her leather-bound tome, a record that outlived the bodies that had spoken them. Merchants, priests, and even magistrates took note of her dedication, though few understood its true purpose. They feared her influence, the calm she inspired, and the way she captured the essence of life in its final moments. Yet she remained undeterred, unwavering in her commitment, understanding that her role was not for recognition but for preservation, a silent guardian chronicling the last truths of humanity. The weight of so many voices pressed upon her, yet she bore it with patience and devotion, ensuring that nothing was lost, that the essence of the condemned's lives would survive in ink and memory. Winter winds howled through the alleys, fog thickened, and Edinburgh shivered under a pall of unease. But she worked tirelessly, quill moving swiftly, recording life's final moments with meticulous care. Her father occasionally glanced at her, understanding at last that she had transformed death into memory, terror into documentation, horror into preservation. Every page she completed became a permanent bridge between the living and the dead, a testament to lives extinguished, voices preserved, and humanity remembered. No execution, no scream, no whispered confession escaped her notice. And as Edinburgh slept under fog and shadow, She remained a solitary figure, recording the human truth that most sought to forget, ensuring that the voices of the condemned, the last expressions of guilt, fear, and regret, would echo eternally in her ever-growing book. In the aftermath of death, she existed as both witness and archivist, bearing the burden of memory, preserving the fragile humanity of those who had passed, and transforming Edinburgh's darkest hours into a permanent record that could not, and would not, be erased by time or indifference. Whispers of the executioner's daughter's work spread beyond the marketplace, into the shadowed corners of Edinburgh, carrying with them an aura of unease and fascination. People spoke of strange occurrences surrounding her presence, inexplicable events that blurred the line between life and death. Some claimed that the condemned, before they reached the scaffold, muttered words not meant for human ears, words she transcribed as though hearing a language of the dead. Others said that fog clung to her footsteps longer than nature would allow, shadows bending unnaturally to follow her path. At night, candlelight flickered against her walls as she read aloud from her notebook, but the voices of the dead seemed to answer, whispering back in tones only she could understand. The city's priests murmured prayers of protection, fearful that she had been touched by forces beyond comprehension. Scholars, too, debated whether her knowledge came from study or from something darker, a gift or curse that allowed her to hear, record, and preserve the final truths of those whose lives had been extinguished. Some nights she dreamed of the dead as they appeared not in flesh but as shadows, whispering their secrets in endless loops, guiding her hand, and warning of horrors yet to come. Fog rolled unnaturally through the streets, and citizens reported strange figures near the gallows, vanishing without a trace, the air heavy with the scent of ink and cold stone. Some argued that the notebook itself had become a vessel for the voices, that each page carried more than words, that it captured something of the soul, a trace of life that lingered even after death. The hangman noticed patterns he could not explain. The condemned occasionally acted differently in her presence, almost as if compelled by forces unseen. Some whispered that she could see the final moments of the dead before they even occurred, glimpsing death in advance, recording what none else could perceive. Those who had survived previous executions told tales of an eerie calm descending upon the platform when she appeared, a quiet influence that made confessions flow, curses echo, and prayers become tangible in the wind. The city's fog seemed thicker, heavier, almost alive, as though it recognized her mission or perhaps sought to conceal her from the living. Shadows of the executed appeared in reflections, fleeting glimpses that vanished when observed directly, leaving only the sensation of presence behind. Scholars who studied mortality and the occult debated her abilities, some labeling her a prophet of death, others a cursed witness, chosen to preserve truths that mortals could not comprehend. And yet she remained indifferent to speculation, devoted only to the task at hand, quill moving tirelessly across the pages, capturing the whispers, the last breaths, the murmured confessions, and the final curses. Nights grew colder, shadows longer, and still the voices persisted, surrounding her, guiding her, shaping her work, until each page of her notebook held more than memory. It held essence. Citizens whispered that even after she left the scaffold, remnants of life seemed to linger, echoes of the condemned following her home, hovering near windows, brushing past doors, carrying their stories into the quiet streets. No one dared question her. To do so was to risk encountering forces they could not comprehend. She walked among the living and the dead alike, a bridge, a chronicler, a silent sentinel whose devotion transformed death into memory, horror into history, and whispers into permanence. Edinburgh had its shadows, but none were as potent, as chilling, as the girl who preserved voices meant to vanish forever. Her notebook became legendary, not only as a repository of final words, but as a vessel of the mysterious, the inexplicable, the cursed. The city itself seemed to bend around her existence, fog lingering unnaturally, shadows lengthening, and the echoes of her recordings imprinted on the minds of those who dared witness her work. She did not fear the dead. She welcomed them, listened to them, recorded them, and in doing so became both historian and guardian, chronicling the mysteries of life's fragile end and ensuring that nothing, even the most secret of confessions, would vanish into oblivion. Strange occurrences continued to follow the executioner's daughter, reinforcing the eerie reputation that surrounded her presence in Edinburgh. Citizens whispered of shadows that moved independently, twisting in ways that defied explanation, always converging near her path, lingering longer than natural light or fog should allow. Some claimed that the condemned in their final moments whispered words only she could transcribe, voices that carried secrets, regrets, curses, and confessions that had never been heard before. The notebook she carried seemed to hum with life, absorbing not just ink but essence, a tangible record of the human soul's final outpouring. At night, candlelight flickered across the pages, illuminating lines written with meticulous devotion. Yet sometimes the ink seemed to shimmer, as if the words themselves carried spectral energy. Ghostly whispers often responded to her soft readings aloud, an eerie chorus echoing through her room as though the dead themselves approved or demanded recognition. Scholars and priests debated the nature of her abilities. Some feared she had been marked by forces beyond mortal comprehension, while others believed she possessed a divine gift allowing her to capture the last truths of humanity. Even the hangman, her father, who had grown accustomed to death, recognized that her presence influenced those about to die, coaxing confessions, soothing fear, and eliciting revelations that might have otherwise remained buried. Rumors claimed that she could anticipate the final words before they were spoken, glimpsing moments of death as if she were intertwined with the very passage between life and oblivion. Citizens reported unusual patterns near the scaffold, fog thickening unnaturally, shadows stretching longer than possible, and the faint echo of whispers when the wind carried no voice. The executioner's daughter did not question these phenomena. She accepted them as part of her duty, understanding that the preservation of human truth required her to navigate between the realms of the living and the dead. Her notebook grew heavier, laden with words that carried the weight of countless souls, each page a testament to life, death, and the mysteries that bridged the two. On winter nights, she walked the streets alone, following echoes of the departed, collecting what had been overlooked, ensuring that no voice went unheard. Citizens avoided her path, fearing the inexplicable, sensing that proximity to her work could bring revelations too intense for ordinary comprehension. The fog seemed almost sentient, bending around her figure, shadows lingering longer where her presence passed, reinforcing the notion that Edinburgh itself acknowledged her sacred duty. Voices of the executed whispered in her mind, sometimes warning, sometimes guiding, always persistent, and she transcribed them diligently, honoring every syllable. The city's alleys were silent witnesses, stone walls absorbing the weight of countless final words, while the living observed in fear and awe the pale girl whose quill recorded what mortals dared not hear. Priests prayed, scholars debated, magistrates feared her influence, and citizens speculated endlessly, but she remained focused, a solitary archivist of human mortality, bridging the gap between life and death, recording confessions, curses, regrets, and truths that would survive beyond the reach of time. She was a conduit, a guardian, a chronicler whose devotion ensured that the ephemeral final expressions of life would be immortalized in ink, defying forgetfulness, preserving both horror and humanity, and turning Edinburgh's darkest moments into permanent living memory. The notebook pulsed with life unseen, a testament to the power of memory, and through her, the voices of the condemned transcended death, whispering eternally across shadowed streets, fogged alleys, and the collective consciousness of a city that would never fully comprehend the depth of her unseen, unrelenting work. The executioner's daughter walked through the fog-laden streets of Edinburgh, her notebook heavy with the weight of countless souls. Each page a testament to lives extinguished, confessions revealed, curses muttered, and regrets whispered into the cold night. She understood that death was impartial, indiscriminate, yet the preservation of its human truth required vigilance, devotion, and courage beyond what most could imagine. Candlelight flickered against her pale face as she reviewed the ink-stained pages, reading aloud the final words of the condemned, letting them echo through her empty room, a haunting chorus of life extinguished but remembered. Shadows danced on the walls, responding to the murmured confessions, twisting with an unnatural rhythm, carrying with them the weight of mortality, the fragility of existence, and the haunting resonance of voices that refused to vanish. She traced each word carefully, aware that the essence of each life, the truth of each final moment depended upon her attention, her precision, her unwavering dedication. The city outside slept uneasily, fog pressing against stone walls carrying whispers of her presence through narrow alleys and silent streets. Citizens who knew of her work spoke in hushed tones, recognizing the chilling devotion that allowed her to endure what none else could, the unrelenting witness of death, the chronicling of human vulnerability, and the preservation of truths too potent for ordinary ears. Her father, the hangman, observed her from the shadows, acknowledging that while he delivered the axe, she delivered memory, immortality, and understanding in equal measure. Even the scholars, priests, and magistrates who speculated about her purpose could not deny the importance of her work. Each confession she recorded carried more than guilt, more than horror. It contained the fragile humanity of those whose lives had ended abruptly, a human truth that demanded acknowledgement and remembrance. Winter winds pressed against the windows, frost forming along the edges. Yet she remained, quill moving tirelessly, candlelight illuminating her dedication, shadow and ink intertwining on each page. Citizens whispered of spectral voices lingering long after executions, of shadows that seemed to follow her, of fog thickening in unnatural ways, all tied to her presence and the sacred work she performed. She did not fear these stories. They were extensions of the lives she preserved, evidence that memory and essence persisted beyond physical death. Her notebook, now thick and heavy, contained the collective weight of human mortality, the truths that most sought to forget, and the confessions that would otherwise vanish into the void. She understood her role fully. She was not merely a witness but a guardian of memory, a chronicler of humanity's final moments, and a preserver of life's truths against the inexorable passage of time. Candlelight danced across her features as she read aloud, the voices of the dead merging with her own, creating a haunting harmony that resonated with sorrow, fear, regret, and fleeting relief. Edinburgh's fog seemed to press closer in acknowledgement, shadows stretching unnaturally, and the city itself became a silent participant in her vigil. Her devotion ensured that no voice would vanish, no confession would be lost, no truth would escape preservation. And in that quiet, chilling dedication she became immortal, not through life, but through the eternal echo of those whose final words she had captured, recorded, and safeguarded, a testament to humanity preserved in the face of relentless mortality. The night settled heavily over Edinburgh, fog weaving through alleys and streets, but the executioner's daughter remained steadfast, quill in hand, notebook open, recording the last breaths, the whispered regrets, the curses and confessions of those long gone. Her room was dimly lit by a single candle, shadows stretching across walls lined with ink-stained pages, each one a permanent echo of lives extinguished. She traced every word meticulously, aware that the essence of each soul relied on her unwavering focus, her dedication to preserving what time sought to erase. Citizens whispered tales of her devotion, of shadows bending around her, fog thickening at her approach, and voices lingering long after the condemned had vanished into eternity. She welcomed these murmurs silently, knowing they were the acknowledgement of her sacred task, the preservation of truths that mortal eyes and ears could rarely comprehend. Her father, the hangman, understood that while he delivered death, she delivered immortality in the form of memory, documenting the human truths that persisted beyond the axe, the scaffold, and the crowd. Each page she completed became a bridge between life and oblivion, a testament to human frailty, confession, fear, and the raw finality of existence. The city, shrouded in fog and shadow, seemed to recognize her devotion, pressing closer, bending around her presence, as though Edinburgh itself acknowledged the sacred responsibility she bore. On nights when the wind howled through the streets, carrying whispers of the dead, she read aloud softly, letting the words resonate in the empty room, blending her voice with those of the departed, creating a haunting symphony of remembrance. Scholars debated, priests prayed, and citizens whispered, yet she remained indifferent to speculation, devoted only to the preservation of life's final expressions. Each confession, each plea, each curse captured in her notebook ensured that the voices of the condemned transcended their physical mortality, persisting beyond time, fog, and oblivion. The weight of countless souls pressed upon her shoulders, yet she bore it without faltering, knowing that memory was the only form of immortality available to those who had perished. Candlelight flickered, shadows shifting unnaturally, and the fog seemed to carry whispers of gratitude, a silent acknowledgement from the very spirits she recorded. Her room, lined with pages, became a sanctuary where life's darkest truths were honored, and the fragility of human existence was preserved against the relentless march of time. She understood that she was both witness and archivist, Guardian and chronicler, transforming horror into history, fear into permanence, and mortality into memory. Each word written, each page completed, served as a monument to lives extinguished, a testament to confessions that would otherwise vanish, and a permanent bridge connecting the living and the dead. The city's citizens, whether they feared her or revered her, could not ignore the influence of her devotion. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, fog thickened at her approach, and echoes of the condemned seemed to follow her silently through narrow alleys, acknowledging the presence of one who preserved what all others allowed to vanish. And so she continued, unwavering, tireless, devoted, ensuring that every final word, every whispered secret, every confession, plea, or curse would endure beyond death, beyond oblivion, beyond the fog and shadow that consumed the streets of Edinburgh. In her hands, life and death intertwined. Horror became history, and the final words of countless souls were immortalized in ink, preserved eternally by the executioner's daughter, guardian of memory, chronicler of mortality, and witness to the city's darkest truths.